an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoiled Me, covering The Magician's Apprentice by Trudi Canavan, chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. In these chapters, we go back in time, like a considerable amount. It looks like this is before the war between Sechaka and Karelia happened, the one that, caused the wasteland. And I'm not sure how I feel about all this. We shall see. But some of the issues that I had in the first 3 books, which I was very willing to look away from, feel all the more egregious in this one. And I'm a little bit concerned that it's going to continue in that vein, and I'm worried about it. We'll see. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Ashleigh for commissioning this. Ashleigh commissioned the first 3 books in the Black Magician Trilogy, and they were really, really fun. And this book, I'm not even trying to say it's not fun, because there are parts of it that surely are. And this is the sort of thing that would not have bothered me if I were reading this 5 or 6 years ago. But I have become a lot more sensitive over time to the subtle racisms, and maybe not so subtle racisms, in a lot of fantasy novels. And in this book in particular, we are starting out of the gate with a really intense, couple of circumstances that lead to the implication that all of the Sechakans are really terrible people, and it's not mitigated by a Sechakan who isn't terrible. We had, in the previous trilogy, it takes us a long time to even meet any Sechakans, so there isn't a feeling of this being built up in our minds. And then once we do, we already have the servant that is working for the High Lord, who is willing to sacrifice himself on behalf of the greater good, and who wants the Sechakans to be defended against and whatever. And I feel like they're kind of going to do that in this book with the slave that's being left behind. But as of right now, and there are a couple of moments that I'll point to specifically, all we have is this really, a really clear line in the sand between white people and brown people. And the brown people are the ones who are barbaric, they are slavers, they are rapists, they are thieves, and they are not just all of those things, but also simply incredibly rude, self-indulgent people. And even the slave that he leaves behind is thinking to himself about how this main character, this girl, is sweet and innocent and kind and young and just very much like Karelia in general, and would never be like Sechaka, she would never survive in Sechaka, that there is nobody like her in Sechaka. The kind of huge, broad brush descriptions that are often used to differentiate people of color from delicate white women. And the fact that that's being said by somebody who is oppressed, from that country, makes it feel all the more gross to me. So there's just a lot of red flags cropping up immediately here that I'm really leery about. Ashleigh is saying, yeah, I've had similar worries. I hadn't read the prequel yet, but from a synopsis, it seemed interesting. But definitely reading the first 50 pages aren't winning me over. Martin says, I get what you're saying, but you'll find the later half better, in my opinion. All right, cool. And that's the thing is like, this sort of thing, oftentimes when you're introducing things, you have to broad brush some of it as an author to try and get your major points across so that the reader knows exactly what they're getting into. But I just found some of the specific choices in language to be almost a parody of what the language used to be surrounding the virtue and naivete of white women who were in danger from brown men. And the fact that our main character here, Tessia, accesses her magic because of an attempted sexual assault by a brown man. Oh, not loving it. So that's just something, and I'm having a particular reaction to that, especially. I don't know how many of you have been watching the TV show The Magicians, and I'm going to give you a real mild spoiler for the very, very first episode, but there is a female character in The Magicians who has some magical ability. Not a ton, but some. And there is a dude who seems to be aware of the fact that she has these abilities and decides that the best way to get them to manifest is by pretending to sexually assault her. He rips off her clothing and tries to tie her up in the bathroom. And thus her magic comes to the fore because she is being fucking assaulted alone in a bathroom at a club. And I am just so tired of being subjected to scenes in which women are victims of sexual violence, even if it doesn't actually turn into rape. It's still this fucking trope that somehow sexual assault makes you stronger. And to have that be how magic manifests in female characters in several different properties, that is the most literal manifestation of that trope that I can think of. They are literally becoming stronger from magic because some man sexually assaulted them. And I just find that really, really disgusting. And I'm seeing that several places. And I just really am not loving the fact that that's the only thing we seem to be able to think of, can we not? So, I'm really trying to give this the benefit of the doubt because this author did not fall back on these sorts of things in the previous 3 books. So I really, really want to see this differently. I really want this to turn into something else. But I'm also trying to approach this the way that I would approach anything else that was using this sort of plot device and be honest about how I feel about it at the same time. So I'm just trying to balance that. And Martin says, also bear in mind, because this is a prequel, you already notions of things in the story that in an ordinary book you wouldn't. I'm not following you. I'm sorry, Martin. Jesus fuck, that's not entertaining, says Lee. Yeah, it really... The Magicians has had a couple of, and everybody's assuring me it gets better, and I believe them because it's a lot of people that I trust their opinions on other things that have not steered me wrong. So I think they're probably telling the truth. But as of right now, the first 3 episodes of The Magicians have been super problematic and riddled with that sort of incel logic that I find particularly revolting, being portrayed by the main character whom we're supposed to like, and I don't. He's trash. So what are you going to do? From what you've read in the first trilogy, you aren't supposed to like the Sachakans. Martin, that's not really my point, though. It's not the thing is that we can want to defend against a group of people without painting those people as all being a monolith of how they behave and all being terrible without any sort of nuance. And also the fact that it's the brown country against the white country, and the brown country is barbaric and terrible, and they are all uniformly terrible. that is, it's one thing to have an enemy, but when there is no nuance and it's being played out in terms that are very relevant to our own world today and how we see people, there's just, you can do better. I feel like you could do better than that. And I feel really, I am fine with disliking Sachakins. Like, it's like saying, well, you dislike Slytherins. But yeah, I want the Slytherins to have some subtlety within them too. I would have loved for JK to explore the fact that not all Slytherins are terrible. And that didn't really happen. And it was a really missed opportunity. And I want Canavan to take that opportunity this time and be a little bit more, be willing to explore more subtlety there. And it doesn't feel like that's where this is going. It's one thing if there's a brown person that's awful, but when that's all the brown people, it's completely different. Yeah, exactly. And there's just all right, I'm going to get into it because there's a couple other like specific things that I want to mention that really sort of weirded me out. So, okay, chapter 1. This is when we get introduced to Tessia, whom I really like. I never ever disliked Sonia. In fact, I liked, or Sonia as I called her because there were too many names that sounded so similar. Sonia was always somebody that I was rooting for and really like felt was smart and managed herself. But I am feeling much more connected to Tessia than I was to Sonia. Sonia, she comes from such profound poverty and just had already undergone so many traumatizing moments in her life that while I really liked her and admired her and understood why she was so concerned about everybody in her family and why she fought against the annual purge and all of this, she still felt so far removed from my experience that it was difficult for me to really identify with her. Tessia lives with her parents. She is cared for by them. Like, they're overbearing in their way, and her mother especially wants her to live a traditional life. But they love her. It's really clear that they love her, and her father especially respects her. And even though her father is trying to discourage her from trying to become a healer because he knows that it might be difficult for her as a woman, you can see that despite him saying this and warning her about it, it's not because he lacks faith in her skills. He knows that she could be great at this. He's just really worried about the social implications of it because he knows that, whatever ideals you have and whatever skills you have, you still have to function in the world. And especially being a healer, you need to have the trust and faith of the people whom you are healing in order to succeed. And if you aren't able to get them to trust you, they aren't going to allow you to help them the way that you need to. So because of this, I really felt Tessia's situation in a way that I didn't feel Sonia's, because we start off the first book in the other trilogy with them being kicked out in the purge. It's a very dramatic scene that feels sort of over the top dystopian. And it's sort of funny looking back how much it set me up to believe that we were in a real serious dystopian situation. But then when you pull back and look at the overall story, it's not actually, that's not really what it is. We're just seeing things from the perspective of somebody who is impoverished in a country that's maintaining one particular terrible tradition, while the rest of the year, the poverty is really kind of like the poverty is everywhere in every country all the time. It's not any more extreme or dramatic than it is if you go to, bad neighborhoods in Philadelphia versus going into Center City. So it's kind of funny how I had a real idea of what I was getting into when I read that first chapter of The Purge. And then I come to find out that it's not what I expected at all. So even though it turns out to not be quite as dramatic a world-building exercise, I never really let go of that impression, even though I started to realize that it wasn't correct. And this sets things up to be a lot more sort of ordinary and mundane. Tessia is living in this village where there is a lord who oversees everything, who owns land and takes tithes and cares for people in response to that. Her parents are, she is assisting her father, who is the physician, and she is learning, and she would like to be able to do this as her profession, but because she is a woman, that is not considered appropriate. This is a much less intense start to the story. And I'm just feeling it because of that, right? So this chapter starts off with her assisting her father with an amputation. There's a young boy, and she doesn't specify exactly how old he is, but I'm guessing he's like 11 or 12, I think. And he got some sort of injury on one finger, and it wound up getting infected. And they had to amputate because otherwise he was going to wind up with blood poisoning and potentially die. And Tessia is reflecting on how simultaneously frightening and fascinating it is that such a small wound can kill you if you don't treat it properly, which I really do get where she's coming from on that. It is kind of fascinating. I could never do medicine because I just have such a visceral repulsion from bodily fluids and body parts and everything. Like, I can't. It's part of the reason why I never want to have kids. Like, last night, Rashawn mentioned that a friend of hers has a thing that she puts over her baby's nose and sucks on it to get the snot out of her baby's nose, and I almost passed out. I could not believe that's a thing. Like, it's so horrifying. And so many parents just do it, and they don't, they just do it. It's a matter of course. And one might argue that if I became a parent, I would become totally used to it and start to be like, oh, this is so not a big deal. But I just never, I can't imagine that. Changing a diaper? I'm sorry, guys. No. Shit? Piss? Blood? I can't do it. I can't. I just oh. So I can I actually think, the side effects of having to inflict pain in order to heal people, all of that, I could deal with because I am very good at shutting off my emotions when I know I have to in order to get through something. But the just gross out factor. No, she talks about handing, I'm going to read this little bit here. Her father's face was creased with concentration. He had carefully peeled the skin of the boy's finger back past the joint of the knuckle. At a glance from him, she took the small jointer knife from the burner and handed it to him, then took the number 5 peeler from him, washed it, and carefully set the blade over the burner so it would be seared clean. Y'all? No. Just absolutely not. I'm not working with tools called peelers and joint cutters unless it's in a fucking kitchen. Thank you very much. Not on people, not on living people, certainly. Holy shit. So Tessia she has whatever it takes to be able to focus on her work, and it's a really interesting, it's just an interesting mind to be inside, that she manages to be as compassionate as she is, while also being able to sort of shut out the pain and the danger of what she's doing, So as her father gives the mother something to do with dealing with the boy, and Tessia reflects on how her father has purposely taken steps every time he treats somebody to bring in someone from the family to help, because that gives them a feeling of having some control over the situation and being involved, which they find comforting and also leads to them trusting him more as well. And I found that really interesting. And I wonder how true that remains today. It's not like we're inviting parents to come in and hold the scissors while somebody is performing surgery on their loved one. So that's going to obviously take a very different shape than it used to. But I wonder if doctors are out there, purposely trying to find a way to involve family in similar methods to gain similar results. And then it ends, and these little moments are things that I really, really like in terms of the setup that Tessia knows what she's doing, and that this has become very routine to her, and that she understands the reasoning behind why her father does things the way that he does. It's all really going to, it's going towards establishing that Tessia is grasping tons of nuance beyond just the physical aspects of what she has to do in certain situations. She's really understanding the psychology behind why they're handling certain things certain ways. And that is just as important as anything. And I really like these details that get dropped in that make me, I feel like there could be a lot of different ways to try and get across how much she loves what she does and how much she wants to be able to do this as a profession. And there have been a lot of books in which the driving force for a main character is that they desperately want to get involved in a particular, industry or line of work, and we get told how much they love it over and over again. But this author is not telling us. She is showing us from Tessia's mind how seriously she takes this, how careful attention she pays, how much she has absorbed over time, how deeply she understands it all. And that is more than anything evidence to me of how much she loves this. And this made it so much more important to me when she's talking to her father later, and we realize that he doesn't want her to become a healer because he's worried that the village isn't going to take to her. I felt a lot more urgency than I normally do with these kinds of stories, that she needs to do this. This is what she's good at. She's clearly cares about people. She's got more talent and understanding than a lot of folks. And the idea of wasting these abilities that she has by making her just go and get married instead I just had a really strong reaction and was so much more like, oh, what a complete shame that would be, rather than it being, it would be so hard on her because she loves this so much. It became more of a matter of principle to me, that you have someone with these talents sitting here in this village with the ability to do a lot of good, and you're just going to flush that down the toilet, At the same time, I also loved the fact that this isn't let's take so many Disney movies that there is a character who wants to do something that everybody else in their community doesn't do, right? Where there's one that wants to be friends with dragons rather than kill dragons. There's one that wants to sail out on the ocean and explore new lands rather than staying on the island where they're safe. There's always something that sets them apart from everybody else. And almost always the parent in charge tells them that this is not for them. It is bad. They must not do it. But we don't get that from her dad. Her dad knows she's super good at this. He looks at her and is not thinking, oh God, I can't have her do this. He's looking at her and having the same reaction as me, which is, she's really good at this and they are just not going to let her. And this is such a fucking shame. He isn't telling her that she can't be a healer because he doesn't believe in her. He is concerned about her because he knows what the world is like. And he probably has seen firsthand the way that people can be. And he's not even a woman, but he's still that aware of how badly this could go for her and how not just something could happen to her or people could just not trust her, but how disappointed she will be when she realizes that the job is different when it's only her and she's not assisting her father, that the reaction that she is used to getting of thankfulness, of respect, may not be there, and how hurt she'll be. And he does not want to watch his daughter go through that. And I just love the dynamic here. It's just so much more true to life, and it feels so much more aware. Both of them are just so much more aware as people. And what is in their way is not each other. It is society and expectations of society. And even her mother, it's easy to get really frustrated with her mother because her mom wants her to be married and have kids. It's very, very easy to look at that and be like, oh God, lady, can you not? You're so basic. But keep in mind, everybody, that her mother is also a woman and has grown up in this society and probably knows all too well how badly things can go if, as a woman, you do not ensure your own safety and stability by at least securing a marriage to somebody who has the capability of taking care of you and a family. And that is just something that I find so frustrating in modern day, where we have taught women for literal centuries, millennia, that they are not capable of earning their own money and that they need a man because they are not going to be allowed into the workforce the way, and that has only very recently changed in the past, like, half a century. Really? I mean, it has not been very long. We have conditioned women to believe this, and it has been true. We conditioned them to believe it for a reason, because it was how things were. That they needed to land a man with the resources to care for a family, because otherwise life was going to be hard. And now, after fucking conditioning women to believe this for centuries, we are suddenly turning on women for wanting to marry successful men. And it's really frustrating that this has suddenly become this thing to be ashamed of, when that was how you survived. Beautiful women were given an enormous advantage in that they were able to leverage their beauty into a better life situation when they had literally no other doors available to them. There were no other paths towards improving their lives and the lives of their family, because don't forget, if you married well and you came from a family that was, either impoverished or at least lower class, that money would be distributed throughout your family as well. It's not like it is today, where every single household has its own money and you may help your parents out and do this and that. It was very different. So if you managed to marry well, you were helping everybody you were related to. So there was a ton of pressure to use your abilities as a woman to make a good marriage to the good of all. The future of your family, in a lot of ways, was on your shoulders regarding how well you were able to marry. And so it's really, really easy to dismiss her mother and get frustrated with her mother. But her mother is functioning within the system that she was raised in and is being very realistic about the reality of where this girl is, what paths are available to her, and what can be done. And I really do think that if her mother were satisfied that Tessia was safe and taken care of, she would be a lot less insistent that Tessia give up being a healer. I think she's worried about her daughter and wants her to be safe and happy and comfortable and healthy and in a position where she will be taken care of and won't have to want for things. And that's really her primary concern. And if that is taken care of, okay, go be a healer, I guess, fine. She won't really have a problem with it, is my feeling. But she thinks that the desire to be a healer is going to get in the way of Tessia being able to be in a stable place. And that is her problem with it. It's not the healing itself. It's that it's an obstacle toward her daughter just being okay. And I think a lot of parents, more than anything, just, want their kids. They want to be able to let go of their kids' well-being and trust that things are going to be all right for them and they don't need to keep an eye on them anymore. I mean, when I got married, I married somebody who was doing well. I was doing okay. We managed to have a pretty decent household, all things considered. And when I told my mother that I was divorcing him, that was her primary worry. It wasn't like she was arguing that she liked the guy and that I should stay with him because he was a good... She was concerned that I was going to be leaving a stable situation, and I wasn't making money at the time. I didn't have a job once I decided to leave my husband. I had to go get a job and start from scratch. And it was extremely difficult. I have gotten past it and I'm doing so much better now. But initially, her fears were very well founded. So I just really like this relationship. Like, it all makes total sense. And I understand everybody's perspective, and I'm not mad at anybody. Like, it can be frustrating and annoying, and her mother just constantly harping on it. I am just kind of like, lady, you need to chill. But it's also, you know, it's a manifestation of her anxiety, and I fucking relate to that on a deep, deep level. Martin is saying, as someone who works in healthcare, you kind of learn to mentally sidestep it. I mean, you probably do, but I'm so uninterested in developing that skill. I worked at a children's hospital, and they taught us to always talk to their child rather than the parents, so the child feels involved and not overlooked. That makes sense. And Leah's saying, no, but it reminded me of anti-vaxxers. I don't know that kind of thing would help, but it's that kind of suspicion which is brought about by a lack of understanding. Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely. All right. So anyway, I basically talked about everything that's going on in that first scene. But they get summoned to the Lord's house, Lord Dakin. And it's like an emergency situation. And it turns out that there is a Sachakin who is staying with his slave. And the person that is hurt is a slave. And it is a really, really bad injury. The dude's ribs are broken. And they have punctured his lung. And she can immediately tell because of how he's breathing. Again, evidence that she's good at her job. A man lay there, his face bruised and swollen so badly one eye was a bloodied, compressed slit. The white of the other eye was dark. She suspected it would appear red in better light. His lips did not line up properly, possibly indicating a broken jaw. His face seemed broad and strangely shaped, though that might have been an effect of the injuries. He also cradled his right hand to his chest, and she saw instantly that the forearm bent in a way it shouldn't. His chest, too, was dark with bruises. All he wore was a pair of short, tattered trousers that had been roughly mended in many places. His skin was deeply tanned, and his build was slight. His feet were bare and black with dirt. One ankle was badly swollen. The calf of the other leg looked slightly crooked, as if it had healed badly after a break. The room was silent but for the man's rapid, labored breathing. Tessia recognized the sound and felt her stomach sink. Her father had once treated a man whose ribs had been broken, puncturing his lungs. That man had died. So yeah, this dude's injuries are fucking horrific. This is like, I mean, this is really bad. And we find out later that his master, like, pinned him against the wall with magic and beat the fuck out of him with magic right in front of Lord Dakin. And I don't think we ever really find out what prompted him to punish his slave that way, or if there was anything that prompted him to do it. But the Sachakin is supremely unconcerned with whether or not his slave heals. In his mind, he's like, well, if you manage to heal him, you can keep him, because I don't want him. And I got really sick of him because he was the only slave I had with me this whole time. And I'm just bored of him. And if he doesn't heal, so much the better. Then neither of us are saddled with him. So that's perfect. It's just really just so horrifying. And then we jump to chapter 2, in which we get to see that Lord Dakin is really not a fan of this guy. And that the name of the Sachakin master is Ashleigh Takado. And there is some like cultural stuff here. This is such a bummer. Of all the tasks required of Lord Dakin's servants, feeding their guest had caused the most distress. If Ashleigh Takado was served a dish he recognized as one he'd eaten before, he would reject it, even if he had enjoyed it. He disliked most dishes, and he had a large appetite, so at each meal, many, many more courses had to be prepared than were normally required to feed 2 people. The reward for enduring the fussiness of this guest was a great surfeit of food, which was shared among the household servants. So they're not enjoying waiting on the guy, but at least there's like a happy byproduct. And we have this scene between Takado and Lord Dakin, in which they talk about, and so here's one of the things that I had mentioned earlier that I wanted to bring up as being a little bit weird to me. He was a full head taller than Dakin, and his broad shoulders and wide face added to the impression of bulk. Beneath a layer of soft fat was the frame of a typical Sachakan, strong and big. Next to Takado, Dakin knew he must appear pathetically thin and small, and pale. While not as dark as the Lonmars of the north, Sachakan's skin was a healthy brown that Karelian women had been trying to achieve with paints for centuries. Which they still did, despite otherwise loathing and fearing Sachakans. Dakin led the way out of the room. They should be proud of their complexion, but centuries of believing our pallor is evidence that we are a weak barbaric race can't be turned around easily. So, okay, here's my problem. This author is trying to have it both ways. She's trying, because this is the reverse of what is true in our world, right? People with dark skin have been shamed forever. Every culture that involves people with brown skin also involves skin lightening products, colorism, people who look upon those of mixed race as being somehow superior to those who are of the pure, darker skinned race, because when you are mixed, your skin is lighter, and that's favorable. And using skin lightening products is hugely popular across Asia, India. Like it's just an enormous industry. And dark-skinned women are rarely featured in like our media. It's almost always light-skinned black women. You know, we've got Tessa Thompson right now, for example, who's in Men in Black. She is in a lot of things, and she is a light-skinned black woman. The woman who is playing Storm in the most recent X-Men, a very light-skinned black woman. And that is just a thing, is that light skin is prized and treated as superior. And those who are of darker skin have internalized that distaste and tell themselves that they are worth less because of it. It has become a part of their identity. So this author is trying to do the opposite and be like, oh yeah, Karelian women try and darken their skin because they want to look more like Sachakans. But there's also, like, then he says in the same breath, despite otherwise loathing and fearing them. And the thing is that this loathing and fear is, in this book, coming from a valid place of they're apparently terrible people. And earlier Martin said you've only met 10 of them, of 8 of which are specially outlaws. And I mean, yeah, but like this author in the previous book, like there were no good Sachakans except for the one that had fled to Karelia. And so it's really like not engendering a lot of confidence in me that they're trying to equate this like racial dominance thing with what we experience in our universe. But this author is still making the brown people adhere to the terrible stereotypes that we accuse brown people of in our world. And the brown people, if you want to accomplish this, you have to make them the superior, maybe military strength, but somehow their cruelty is much more like civilized, and their cruelty is organized in such a way that feels like this inexorable tide, the way that white imperialism affected everybody, because that is where colorism comes from, is white imperialism. If you don't have that kind of relationship with the people in this world, that kind of colorism doesn't really make any sense. And I don't know enough about the history of this place yet to know if that's true, but it certainly doesn't feel like it's being set up to be true. It's not ringing true to me at all right now. Ashleigh is saying, yeah, because even when the colorism isn't stemming from racism, it has traditionally been shorthand for someone who's less wealthy because those with darker skin would have worked in the sun more, right? And then we have like, well, if you're tan now, it's meant to be like, oh, well, you have more leisure time, so you're able to be in the sun because you're not stuck in a cubicle working somewhere. But there is still like, there's shorthand for, how that, well, she may be tan, but she's blonde and blue-eyed, so we know she's not really dark. Like, we're careful to sort of like establish whether or not this is real, and if it isn't real, it's better, right? So this whole thing with the Sechakans being set up as being barbaric, terrible slavers who kill their slaves with no remorse or care, who treat them like their property in the like most basic sense of the word. And yet, and we're having this butting up against Karelia, and the very people of Sechaka, like we have the slave thinking about how Karelia is such a better, peaceful place. He isn't even buying it that the Sechakans are better or something to aspire to. That doesn't work. The solely going off of like the might of a country, you need more than that. You need something that's insidious, that gets into all of the cultures and sort of inserts itself, that manages to brainwash over time people into thinking that Sechakans are somehow superior, actually really are superior, that they are more civilized and advanced somehow. And it does not feel like anybody in Karelia really believes that. And it doesn't even feel like this Sechakan slave, who should believe that as much as anybody, he does not believe it either. And that's part of the problem with the fact that the Sechakans are enslaving their own people versus enslaving somebody of another color. If the Sechakans were slaving Karelians, then this might work a little bit better, but they're not really. Color doesn't come into it. So to try and talk about color here and point that out as if you're saying something, when you're not really willing to commit to what that means on a global scale, you can't do that. It's too huge and complicated an issue to just touch on and act like, well, I mentioned it, so it means the same thing. It doesn't. We don't have the history behind it. We don't have that kind of, that overpowering presence and like I said, sort of brainwashing that happens with colonizing countries and obliterating whole peoples, genocide. There's just, it doesn't work without that sort of background. So I feel like this author wants us to see the Sechakans as the enemy. She decided to make them all brown. She decided to make them very barbaric. But then she also decided that she wanted the Karelians to aspire to look like them. And that's just not how it's going to be. It wouldn't. It doesn't work. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I just stopped and read that and was like, what is she doing here? And then there's this other weird moment. She'd also decorated and furnished the seating room. After another Sechakan visitor, impressed with the library, had decided that Dakin's father would gift him with several valuable books, she had decreed that such visitors be entertained in a room that appeared full of priceless treasures, but actually contained copies, fakes, or inexpensive knickknacks. So, yeah, we're not going to get into that whole thing, but because I'm running out of time here, but I'm just really wanting to give you guys a good idea of where I'm coming from with my discomfort for some of these things. So this conversation between Takato and Dakin is really meant to establish how brutal Takato is, how completely unconcerned he is that he probably killed his slave. I probably went a bit too far. Trouble is, after traveling with him for months, I've grown utterly sick of his company. You would too if you were restricted to one servant when you visited a country. I'm sure whichever of your kings came up with that law only wanted to punish Sachakans. If my slaves didn't alert me to problems in my domain or get the best out of my crops, I'd have them killed. And this is when Dakin is like, well, that would be wasting them. They take pride in it and are more likely to be innovative and inventive, like the healer tending your slave. But not like his daughter, Takato said. Her skill will be wasted, won't it? She is a woman, and in Karelia, women do not become healers. In my country, her skills would be utilized. If you let me buy her off you, I'll make sure she gets to use them. I suspect she'd welcome the chance. Even if I would not be breaking a law, and she agreed to do such a thing, I don't think it's her healing skills you're interested in. Takato relaxed and laughed. You've seen through me once again. I expect you haven't tasted that dish. Or have you? Of course not. She's half my age, which only makes her more appealing. Takato was goading him again, Dakin knew. And more likely that such a liaison would make me look like a fool. So yeah, he's just, they're trying to press this guy is bad button. He has slaves. He beats his slaves. He has no compunction about killing his slaves. He sees women as objects. The younger they are, the more appealing they are, which really implies that he's probably a pedophile. We're really going hard on the this is a bad dude thing. So this conversation just sort of ends with him being like, I'm going to leave my slave with you even if he's healed. And we go to Tessia, who is talking to her mother after they get home and is asking, did Kanya say why he was beaten? And her mother says, what reason do those Sachakan brutes need? Most likely he did it for fun, but put a bit more force into it than he intended. Lord Yervin always said that not all Sachakans are cruel, her father said. Just most of them, Tessia finished. Guys, listen. So they get sent to bed, and she's about to fall asleep when she overhears her parents talking about her having kids. And her mother is saying, I know that you want grandkids. And he's like, yeah, I do. But also, I wouldn't be terribly upset if she decided not to go through with trying to have kids because it's really dangerous and risky. And she says it's a risk we all must take. To not have children out of fear is wrong. Yes, it is a risk, but the rewards are so great. She could deny herself great joy. And who will look after her when she is old? Guys, can I just stop here for a second and get on a personal note real quick? I have had so many people, when I say that I don't want to have kids, ask me, but then who's going to take care of you when you're old? And I cannot think of a more fucked up reasoning for having kids. Because you would like a caretaker someday. So you're going to raise a child out of a selfish desire to ensure your own well-being later on down the line and put that on their shoulders. That's inconceivable to me that is a genuine thing that people think to themselves, is that they should have kids because that will help them when they're old one day. Well, then who will take care of me? I just can't, that is so unbelievably selfish. And also not actually practically true in any case most of the time anymore. Kids try their best, but the economy that we are born into, it's not like we have money to spare to buy a bigger house for a parent to move into and also pay to keep them alive and buy nursing and medicine for them. We can barely keep ourselves alive. And I can't imagine the disappointment that people must be feeling who are starting to reach an age where they are going to need to rely on their kids more. And they're realizing that their kids are in no position to take care of them or help them. Guess what? You can't rely on that shit. And to use that as reasoning for bringing a child into the world is absolute. It's unconscionable to me. I just hate it so much. Also, to not have children out of fear is wrong. I think that's wrong. If you are afraid of raising kids, I think that is valid. And that is a huge portion of me not wanting to raise kids. I feel like you have to have a certain amount of confidence bordering on arrogance to decide that you are capable of raising a balanced person. And I don't feel like I have that capacity. And I don't trust myself that much. And people out there who really are just like, I would be able to do that. I'm just looking at them like, how deluded are you to really believe that you could take on that responsibility and just do a good job and trust yourself like that? I just can't imagine having that sort of self-confidence / arrogance. It really tends toward arrogance in my mind. So yeah, this whole thing, kids are just so not on the table for me. And whenever people talk about them in these sorts of terms, it's appalling in my mind. I can't. So this is the only time where I really started to get mad at her mom. So we meet also, another apprentice, Jayan. And I say another because Tessia is going to be an apprentice. But Jayan is Lord Dakin's apprentice, and he has been kept out of the way of the T'Chakan because the T'Chakans are just kind of like, they're dangerous and sort of press and are like apparently just unpleasant to be around, and they just decided to keep Jayan away. And he is being waited on by Malia, who is his servant, and she flirts with him a lot. And he finds her attractive and is like low-key interested. But Lord Dakin has made it really clear that this is not an option for you. You cannot take advantage of her, and don't let her take advantage of you either. She will try and play you, and you can't let that happen. And Jayan also knows that Lord Dakin doesn't play, and that if he fucks up on this, Dakin will find a way to punish him that will be pretty unpleasant, and not necessarily physically, but, in some way. So he doesn't want to risk possibly the worst penalty that he could endure, which is being sent back to his family and Lord Dakin being like, I'm sorry, this kid is unteachable. Reminder, this is set before the guild has been created. There's no official school. This is all one-on-one training. So if he gets rejected by this guy, it's not like he can just go to some other center where everybody gathers together and pick another magician and be like, hey, teach me. This is becoming an apprentice is a tricky business. And if he's proven to be unworthy of learning, I think they take his magic away, right? Probably. Lock it up. So anyway, he is talking, he's thinking to himself about how he wants to go and make his own fortune, and thinks to himself, nothing was more respected in Curalia than ownership of land, even if all it encompassed was one of the city's grand old houses. But ownership of a lay was rated more highly than ownership of a house, which was ironic since magicians who lived in the country were considered backward thinking and out of touch. If Jayan stayed on good terms with his master, and Dakin did not marry and sire an heir, there was a chance the Lord would nominate him as his successor. It was not unheard of for a magician to favor a former apprentice in this way. And Jayan actually likes living in the country as well. So he's just it's not just the power and the wealth that would come with that. The whole lifestyle for him, he's just I don't really want to live in the city. This is kind of good for me. But he's aware that Dakin is young enough to still get married and have children. So that's not something that he can rely on. And because of that, he really needs to make sure he's good enough at magic to make his way through the world later by himself. So this is when we have Tessia, who wakes up and her father is still passed out from being up so late the night before. And she decides that she's going to go ahead and go check on this slave and change his bandages and do all of the necessary stuff without her dad, to try and prove that the people are still going to have confidence in her even if he is not with her. And she goes and here it is. Yeah. She's talking to the servant after she, changes his bandages and everything. I suppose he's a good patient to experiment on, the Sachakan said, looking at his slave, because he comes up and is watching her do this. Perhaps you'll learn something new. The Sachakan looked at her again. Enjoy yourself. She looked at the slave and smiled crookedly. Your master has a strange idea of fun. Yeah, yuck. Is he, let's see. I'm trying to find the spot. Oh yeah, here it is. When she had finished at last, the Sachakan's visit was a distant, unpleasant memory. She packed her father's bag and picked it up. Pausing at the door, she nodded at the slave. Rest well, Hanara. So she's walking past the room, and this is when the Takado stops her. And he uses magic to, pin her to him. And she doesn't realize until later when she looks down, but he has started to undress her as well. And I suspect also that once he touches her, I think he probably senses the magic because he uses slaves to draw on their magic, like we know with the blood magic. So that's going to make her an even bigger prize because she's beautiful and she has medical skills and she has magic. He's going to want to come back for her. This is not going to end here. And this is when her magic explodes and shoves him off. And she doesn't tell Dakin when he walks in what actually happened. She tells him, I was rude. He took offense. I'm sorry. And she thinks that Dakin is the one that used a spell to blast the Sachakan off her. It isn't until later when he comes to the house and is like, I think she used magic, that she's like, what? I thought that was you. So this is when we go to chapter 4 from Hanara's perspective. The past was stuffed with bad memories. The good ones left him full of bitterness. Considering the future was even more unpleasant. The servant woman who fed him had told him during her last visit that his master had left. She had told Hanara he was safe now. She has no idea, he thought. None of these Karelians do, except perhaps the magician. Takado will come back. He has to. When he comes back, he'll either take me with him or kill me. If Hanara hadn't healed enough by then to be useful to Takado, the latter was more likely. No Sachakan magician was going to waste time tending to the wounds of a slave, or wait while that slave struggled to keep up. Would the healers have worked so hard if they knew there was a chance their efforts would be wasted? Remembering the young woman, Hanara felt a strange constriction inside. Her touch had been gentle, her words kind. A person like her could not exist in his homeland. Only in this country was it possible for a woman her age to be so lacking in guile and bitterness. She was like all the other good things he had seen in this land, which filled him with longing even as he despised them. He wished Takado had never visited Kyralia. The healer woman and Kyralia were the same, young, free, blissfully unaware of how lucky they were. It was hard to imagine she could ever defend herself against the cruel power of Sachakan magic, yet even his master had admitted that Kyralians could be annoyingly feisty when faced with a threat. So, you see what I'm saying, guys, about the language and the whole way that this is presented? It's just really not awesome. And we hear, Hanara has been forced to mate with women and have children because of his magical talent, and that will breed other children of magical talent who will also be taken as slaves. And he's just sort of laying there thinking about that, and he doesn't even have really a connection to any of his children. So thinking about the fact that one of his children is going to be used to sort of replace him doesn't really engender any sort of emotional response. It's just sort of like, well, I wonder who he's going to pick in this distant way. So Dakin talks to Jayan about the suspicion that he has that Tessia has magic. And Jayan's response is really interesting. He doesn't love the idea of having to share his apprenticeship with someone else. He likes it even less that she's a woman, and he likes it even less than that she is lower class, and he just does not think that they will be able to carry on the kinds of lessons that they have been up till now with a lower class woman as one of the apprentices. He just thinks this is all going to change. Tessia was by no means Dakin's social equal, so perhaps she would not always be a part of their social evenings. No, he decided, she will have lessons separately, too, because they'll be so basic there won't be much point my being here, but she'll demand a lot of Dakin's time. So Jayan tries to be like, well, you could send her to somebody else and have them teach her, and Dakin's like, I'm not sending her away from her family. That's totally not happening. And we find out later, when Dakin talks to her parents, that he is going to have her come and live up at the, and that's a pretty big deal. And she realizes a little belatedly, after her mother gives her a valuable necklace that her father gave to her, that her mother is low-key hoping that by displaying magical talent and staying with Dakin, she might be able to win his heart and actually marry him instead. Which, you know, obviously Tessia finds ludicrous, but, you know, and she's like, he's so much older than me. And I'm like, yeah, but that's never stopped. Like, we have, you know, 55-year-old men marrying 14-year-olds in our histories. Like, this is totally something that was done. So who fucking knows? And Dakin doesn't seem like a terrible dude, but I'm not a huge fan of giant age gaps. And, like, there was a weird enough age gap between Sania and Acheron, you know? And maybe it'll be Jayan. Maybe it'll be much more age appropriate. But Jayan's a pretty big snob, right? Like, as we see right now. So he'll have to sort of get over some of that. But anyway, I'm not exactly excited about any sort of romantic prospect. So we don't need to worry about that, in my opinion. Yeah, so that's the end of the chapter, is her her packing her bags and heading out and realizing that her mother is hoping she will find a way to marry this lord and drop all of her hopes of being a healer. It's really funny because, you know, we know that the healers are a whole faction of the guild in future times, but right now everybody's behaving as if her discovering she has magic means that she has to give up wanting to be a healer, and it's just, obviously they don't know the extent of what can be done at this point, so that's pretty fascinating. Lee says, Ashleigh says, I was getting the vibe she was being lined up for a relationship with the injured slave guy. That's interesting. I didn't pick that up, but maybe. Pretty much if there's anybody who's like anywhere remotely close to the girl's age, when you're the only female in the story, anybody is a potential match, right? You know, like that's just how this sort of winds up going with stories like this. So it could go in a myriad of directions. But yeah, so that's the end of this section. I'm about to go over time, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. But thank you, Ashleigh, for the commission. My apologies for being kind of hard on it, but I think I was fair. And, and Ashleigh's saying, mostly because of his she's so innocent and perfect thoughts. That's fair. So who knows? Though Canavan was going for MPDG. I don't know what that means. MPDG. Most palliative digestive guest. Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Ah, ha, ha. I didn't even pick up on that. I prefer the digestive guest. All right, guys. I think I'm getting a little punchy. I have one more recording after this, so I will wrap. But thank you all again so much for coming. I appreciate having you all in the chat. I just like having the other perspectives, you know. And also, occasionally, I forget people's names, so having someone to remind me is helpful as well. But, yeah, so hopefully I will see you for another one of these. And I hope y'all are enjoying listening. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.